And a bad morning to all of you. We've got a good show for you today. It is 8:02. I started a couple of minutes late because I was fucking composing the tweet when I could have done that earlier. So apologies to everybody who waited the excoriating 90 seconds to get this started. But this is the 24th of July, 2018. We have a shit ton of news, some of it international, some of it domestic to the US, and we've got plenty of reasons for you to be pissed off enough to do terrible things to your coworkers. One of those terrible things could be drinking fluids from a Liberty mug, which that link is available in the description. Feel free to pick one of those up because they're mugs emblazoned with logos that you can use to piss off your coworkers. So those will be, what was it? I think they're like under $15, and I think that they might have also like discount codes or something. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't been there in a while, but I would highly recommend picking up the one that says, they use Bitcoin for drugs, right? And it has a brainlet on it. It's fucking hilarious. And also Brave Browser, the ad-resistant, tracker-resistant browsing experience powers this show, and it assists every time you download it and use it for a course of over 30 days. So consider doing that as well. Additionally, there's a Cash App, and Cash App is the Federal Reserve note and Bitcoin wallet. It comes with a Visa card, and you can get $5 sent back the first time you send $5, and I get $5 as well. So everything like that supports the show, and I would greatly appreciate it if you did it. There's plenty more ways of doing that in the description, not the least of which is going to patreon.com/insanity is free. It is going to be a hilarious day, I have a feeling, because we're already starting off with hilarity. I'm gonna pass it to Lupin it to discuss the Grease story after I just discuss, like, for a few seconds, this man who is a courageous and brave human who is, sacrificed quite a bit for our freedom. This is this is a guy. Eric Stagno of Haverhill, Massachusetts, was arrested for indecent exposure and disorderly conduct after police said he stripped down inside of Planet Fitness. And the thing trending on Twitter is a naked man at Planet Fitness defended his choice, saying he thought it was a judgment-free zone. So, congratulations, Eric. You've made a very good point here, because Planet Fitness fucking sucks, and objectively, if they are a judgment-free zone, a zone free enough of judgment that they'll constantly kick people out for breathing too hard, all while basically humiliating them with fucking lights, and sirens, and fucking it's fucking a terrible place. I could not emphasize that enough. But hats off to you, Eric. Cheers to everything that you have to go through shortly, and I hope that your trial is short and that you're not jailed for it. Anyway, after that, let's dive right into the negativity and talk about Greece.
Yeah. So this is a particularly nasty event that seems to have happened. So I got this from the Daily Mail. So pinch of salt, perhaps, but I suspect this one is true because it's also from AFP. So anyway, Greek fire kills 60. Now, this was at about 2 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours ago. 10 tourists drown when boat capsizes trying to rescue them from Gilder flames. 26 die huddled near a cliff, and more burned to death in traffic jams as officials fear arsonists simultaneously started 15 blazes. So 60 are dead, including a 6-month-old baby, as worst Greek forest fires in a decade ripped through the Athens region. Rescuers say they found the bodies of 26 people, apparently families, found huddled tightly together at one villa. In the same village of Mati, people were burned alive after being caught in a traffic jam while fleeing to beaches. 10 tourists, including a mother and son, drowned when a boat capsized trying to rescue them from the village. Fires fueled by 65-mile-per-hour winds and temperatures of 104 degrees Fahrenheit tore through the communities in a matter of minutes. Greece has asked U.S. drones to detect suspicious activity as it emerges 15 fires had started at the same time. And the Interior Minister described the fires as a national tragedy and a biblical disaster with human losses. And yeah, this is a bit graphic, people. It's not going to be a pleasant one. 10 tourists drowned when a boat capsized trying to rescue them from a gale-driven forest fires, which have killed at least 60 in Greece, and which may have been started deliberately. A mother and son from Poland were among the dead when a vessel flipped in the water amid rough seas after picking up guests from a hotel in Mati as forest fires tore through the resort's 25 miles from Athens. In the same village, a number of holidaymakers and locals were burned alive, and some of them trapped in their cars in traffic jams, as hundreds tried to flee the raging inferno, which also devoured more than 1,000 homes. Dashing to the water was the only way to escape from most villages, but some, including families with children, found clasped in a last embrace, perished behind a wall of flames and toxic smoke as the lightning-quick fire swept from the hillsides to the sea in less than 10 minutes. Charred bodies were found on a narrow road clogged with traffic in the village, which a local mayor said now, quote, no longer exists. Some survivors spent fraught hours choking on clouds of ash at the edge of the water as they waited for help and watched their town burn. In the same resort, horrified officials found 26 bodies, apparently families huddled together tightly in a final attempt to protect themselves. They were less than 100 feet from the sea, having apparently made a desperate attempt to escape from their villas, but ended up trapped between fire and cliffs. One girl died as she tried to jump into the water. Officials have asked for U.S. drones to observe and detect any suspicious activity. As it emerged, 15 fires had started at the same time in 3 different areas near Athens, possibly by criminals intending to ransack homes once they were abandoned by fleeing residents. Driven by winds of up to 65 miles per hour and 104-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. For anybody from Britain, that's 40 degrees Celsius. The worst Greek forest fires in a decade have been described as a national tragedy and a biblical disaster with human losses. One of the youngest victims was a 6-month-old baby who died of smoke inhalation. And then, to be honest, there are a lot of photos. None of them are very pleasant. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to stop there, to be honest, because having lived through a house fire myself, this is actually starting to bring up some memories. So I think I'll put a pin in that one for the time being. But yeah.
Well, I mean, and this was bound to happen eventually, like in a very serious way. This is the general sentiment when you realize that your economy, which you handed to other people, was not being properly managed. I mean, there's been such a distrust of the system in Greece over the past, like, you know, I want to say 2.5 decades, and it's been for really fucking good reasons, because essentially they've outlawed economic sanity, and they've turned their country into a third world nation in terms of fucking, well, at least the politicians have, in terms of what's allowed to happen there and what's not, and effectively also tax the individual into oblivion. There's like few jobs for the people who are starting out there. You know, it's a really, really bad scene. And it's not surprising that some people decided that they were going to burn it all down. I mean, there's a hashtag on Twitter, BTFSTTG, burn the fucking system to the ground. And you can find plenty of people there who are just so angry that they just want to fucking torch it all. And that's what I have a feeling. That's what I have a feeling happened here. Well, some people have a different idea of who or what the system is, dude. Like, That's like, not everybody's going to agree with me or you. And also, of course, some of these people were probably just like Fergusonites, and they were like, you know, opportunists using the opportunity to
Opportunists, yeah,
live.
I'll give you that.
To
I'll give
live.
you opportunists. Hands down. This
But I
is a
have a
crime
feeling,
of opportunity.
right? But I have a feeling some of them were in it because they got angry at the system, you know, and they didn't know where to direct it. So
possibly. I don't
anyway,
know which is worse.
well, I mean, it's pretty definitely worse to have opportunism, because then it doesn't matter what economy arises. If opportunism becomes the sort of accepted norm, the society's fucked. If it's
True.
not about reason and, you know, being good to your neighbor instead of the state's bad neighbor that they want you to be, realistically, your society is doomed.
Mm.
But you know, that's my take on it anyway. Like, I could be entirely off base here, but I have a feeling that those factors were what heavily weighed into this. And also, of course, the fact that the place was built very, you know, fire unresistant, we can say.
Oh, well, yeah, there's a problem with having your house on a hill. The higher you go after a certain range, you tend to get a lot of wind. And being on top of the hill tends to mean that you've got even more wind. So if it's something like where you could position it further down or something like that, you might have a better chance. But they didn't like doing that, funnily enough. They like to have a view. And I don't blame them for that, but at the same time, there are risks that come from that, having that view in some cases.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how many Grecians have a have decent enough insurance to compensate for shit like this.
Well, one can hope, but it's probably going to be considered a high risk factor in some cases. And speaking from experience, insurances don't like to pay out on high risk things.
Yeah, definitely. And you know that, and so does oh man, there was somebody else I was speaking to recently who went through a house fire at one point. I don't remember who it was. Fuck. Well, if I remember, I'll finish that sentence. Anyway, fucking let's get to this other story.
Yeah.
Cops investigated as video shows police pin tiny boy to the ground for trying to protect his dad. Dramatic video footage has sparked debate online as it shows two officers pin a small boy to the ground as he tried to stop them from arresting his father. In Athens, Georgia, a dramatic video was up. This is from the freethoughtproject.com, by the way. In Athens, Georgia, a dramatic video was uploaded to Facebook this week showing two police officers restraining a small boy in Athens over the weekend. The video quickly went viral, which prompted police to respond and release body camera footage of the entire scenario. The incident happened Friday as officers were called out to the home of Yowoski Mandel Collins. During Collins' arrest, the child became extremely emotionally distraught. Athens Clark County Police spokesman Epifanio Rodriguez said in a statement. The original video posted to Facebook did not show what happened before the child was restrained. However, body camera video appears to show it all. As police were taking Collins, who was apparently the boy's father, into custody, the young boy began to break down at the thought of his daddy going to jail. That's in quotes. At one point, an adult female on the scene picked up the boy and brought him away from the officers as he tried to block their path while placing Collins in the cruiser. As the incident unfolded, the boy became more distraught, and as the body camera footage shows, he ran toward the officers. It is at this point that dispute arises over how police reacted to the incident. According to family members, when the boy ran toward police, he was thrown into the car and then slammed into the ground and held down by the officers. According to police, however, the boy running at the officer caused the officer to fall into the patrol car. On Monday, the Athens Clark County Police Department released the following statement describing the scenario. Quote, as the suspect was being placed in the back of the patrol car, the video clearly shows the child run past family members and then and again ran toward our officer and lunged at one of the officers. Our officer caught the child in midair, and the momentum of the child launching himself caused the both of them to land on the patrol car. The child continued to be emotionally distraught and continued with the outburst, at which time our officer placed him on the ground. While on the ground, the officer continued to attempt to de-escalate the situation, assuring the child that he was not under arrest and that he would let him up if he would remain calm. One of the officers believed the child had calmed down, or once the officers believed the child had calmed down, he allowed him to return to his feet. As the video shows, the boy was still crying and upset when he was lifted back up by police. What's more, even though police were originally trying to put handcuffs on the child, they made the wise decision not to do so, which certainly helped to calm the situation down. After the boy showed he could be calm enough to do so, police then allowed him to talk to his father. According to the statement, the child continued to be emotionally distraught but was not resistant toward our officers. Our officer began to consult the child and helped him to understand what was happening to his father. The child asked to speak with his father and was allowed to do so by our officers. This very emotional moment of the boy telling his father goodbye was clearly captured on the officer's body camera. The subsequent release of the videos has led to quite the debate online about the officer's use of force and de-escalation techniques. I do not see justification for the amount of force used. I see the kid jump, there is a slight jolt to the camera, then you see the kid being held against the car. Then you see him being lifted by his arms behind his back and body slammed face first into the ground. This is a child. I don't see how all of these people are justifying treating a child like that when there's so much training available for officers to learn legitimate de-escalation techniques when dealing with children. I'm sad for our community, Anna Marie Bennett wrote on Facebook. And there's plenty more comments like this, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. Don't you love how when the police write a statement, they come up with shit like, placed the kid on the ground and assured and explained and all of this shit when really like the officers were abusing a child and it's caught on video.
Mate, that's the problem. De-escalation training is taught to higher ups because they need to de-escalate the situation of their own cops half the time. In a lot of situations, those are the ones who actually can de-escalate incidents, people with decent training. This is actually part of the reason why but historically, the British police worked well. Right now, the British police don't work well because they're too afraid of being called racist. Because they've been called racist once, and it's really impacted how they work. So they don't want to be called that anymore. More's the pity, perhaps, in this case, because if they stopped caring about that, they'd be in a much better position. Anyway, slight diversion there. Anyway, these particular incidents are notorious. You get some really bad event happening with a cop, and then their captain will come out and de-escalate the situation by using very careful language that makes it sound like it's for your own good, it's for your own protection. We do this for you, not for ourselves. It's the exact opposite of that, but that's how language works. If you can work out a way of speaking to someone to explain to them carefully and calmly that they need to relax and let things go, then, well, that's the problem. The only people who are telling anybody to relax and let things go are the people broadcasting what happened to some poor kid. What should have been done is the kid should have been able to have had that de-escalation. The kid should have been spoken to calmly and tried. I mean, he didn't have a weapon. It's not like he was under threat. And I'm sorry, I can't accept the 9-year-old would be a really potential threat to anybody in full body armor or in full uniform, effectively, particularly in the States.
He could have been theoretically if this had been like, some other situation. But this particular situation, you can see how spindly this little kid is and how ragdoll he was when they threw him at the ground.
Exactly. I mean, in this situation, there's really no justification for it. I mean, you could say if they were like 16, like running back with like a black belt in Taekwondo, maybe you could make that kind of argument. But this situation, hell no.
Right. Well, and let's be real specific here. This would be considered child abuse if a parent did it. If a non-state official did it, this would be considered child abuse.
Oh, and yeah, CPS would have that kid away in no time.
Right. Well, and so that double standard is added again. It's it's the idea that the state is somehow ethically separated from the non-state actors, and that's fucking.
Oh, but it is by its own rules. By its own rules, it's ethically superior because it's the one calling all the shots. It's the problem when you have a conflict of interest where three parties in the mix are all state provide. Right. You know, they're all part members of the state. But and in the worst case scenarios, it's full.
But at the same time, we shouldn't allow the state to determine what ethics are. That's a real good way to lose everything.
Oh yeah, but most people haven't woken up to that, unfortunately, yet. They are starting to.
Well, right, but at the same time, all I mean to say is like it's still ethically not a double standard. Like the standards don't change just because an officer wants them to, or some government agent wants them to. That's my only point here.
Oh, true. From an op perspective, that is the case. Yeah, from his perspective, it's still up for debate, I'd say.
Well, I would say that in terms of philosophy, I mean, they can say 4 is 2 all they want, but it's not. So
true, but if enough people believe it, it must be true.
Well, it's true enough that you're gonna encounter some stiff opposition for saying it's not.
Yeah.
It's sort of like this thing this morning. Sweet D says with a Z. Actually, I just fucking SWEETDEESEZ. You can look up this account on Twitter. She's a really good person. I've been speaking to her for a while, and she tags me in this picture this morning, and I'm like, and she says, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about answers. And it's a quote from Thomas Pynchon. And I made a little joke below here that says, wait, so you're telling me they could have prevented Pearl Harbor and the sinking of the Lusitania, and you're telling me they armed, trained, and funded the Mujahideen, who eventually became Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and they knew 9/11 was about to happen? Feds, come with us, sir. So...
Honestly, if you had the speech laws and whatnot that you have over here...
Yeah,
I probably wouldn't go too far past it, to be honest. I really wouldn't. You get enough of them and you'd be called a misogynistic, racist, homophobe.
Well, hey, maybe at some point they'll go visit Great Britain. I'll stop for a few pints at the local pub and I'll fucking with you and I'll fucking I'll piss off the local authorities to be banned from there like Tomi Lahren.
I was going to say, be careful you don't wind up like Lauren Southern.
Yeah, Lauren Southern is who I meant to say. Fucking whatever. Yeah. Blonde conservative female. I'm sure that joke would be something that they would appreciate since they like triggering people anyway. So,
True.
And did you have more than that Grease story and the other story? Because I can read a couple more from what I have right now.
Let's see. I didn't find too many more today. Hang on. There was one regarding Assange.
Yeah, let's do that.
The Intercept. So, yeah, some bad news. It looks like Ecuador will imminently withdraw asylum for Julian Assange and hand him over to the UK. What comes next? From Glenn Greenwald on the 21st of July. Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno traveled to London on Friday for ostensibly the purpose of speaking at the 2018 Global Disability Summit. Moreno has been using a wheelchair since being shot in a 1998 robbery attempt. The concealed actual purpose of the president's trip is to meet with British officials to finalize an agreement under which Ecuador will withdraw its asylum protection of Julian Assange, in place since 2012, eject him from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and then hand the WikiLeaks founder over to British authorities. Moreno's itinerary also notably includes a trip to Madrid, where he will meet with Spanish officials still seething over Assange's denunciation of human rights abuses perpetrated by the Spanish central government against protesters marching for Catalonian independence. Almost 3 months ago, Ecuador blocked Assange from accessing the internet, and Assange has not been able to communicate with the outside world ever since. The prime factor in Ecuador's decision to silence him was the Spanish anger over Assange's tweets about Catalonia. And then there's a picture of a presidential decree signed on July 17th by Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno outlining his trip to London and Madrid. A source close to the Ecuadorian Foreign Ministry and the President's office, unauthorized to speak publicly, has confirmed to The Intercept that Moreno is close to finalizing, if he has not already finalized, an agreement to hand over Assange to the UK within the next several weeks. Withdrawal of asylum and physical ejection of Assange could come as early this week. On Friday, RT reported that Ecuador was preparing to enter such an agreement. Consequences of such an agreement depend in part on the concessions Ecuador extracts in exchange for withdrawing Assange's asylum. But former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa told The Intercept in an interview in May, Moreno's government has returned Ecuador to a highly subservient and submissive posture towards Western governments. It is thus highly unlikely that Moreno, who has shown himself to be willing to submit to threats and coercion from the UK, Spain, and the US, will obtain a guarantee that the UK not extradite Assange to the US, where top Donald Trump officials have vowed to prosecute Assange and destroy WikiLeaks. The central oddity of the Assange case, that he has been effectively imprisoned for 8 years despite never having been charged with, let alone convicted of, any crime, is virtually certain to be prolonged once Ecuador hands him over to the UK. Even under the best-case scenario, it appears highly likely that Assange will continue to be imprisoned by British authorities. The only known criminal proceeding Assange currently faces is a pending 2012 arrest warrant for failure to surrender. Basically, a minor bail violation that arose when he obtained asylum from Ecuador rather than complying with bail conditions by returning to court for a hearing on his attempt to resist extradition to Sweden. That offense carries a prison term of 3 months and a fine, though it is possible the time Assange has spent in prison in the UK could be accounted against that sentence. In 2010, Assange was imprisoned in Wandsworth Prison and kept in isolation for 10 days until he was released on bail, and then he was under house arrest for 550 days at the home of a supporter. Assange's lawyer, Jen Robinson, told The Intercept that he would argue that all of that prison time already served should count toward and thus completely fill any prison time imposed under the failure to surrender charge, though British prosecutors would almost certainly contest that claim. Assange would also argue that he had a reasonable, valid basis for seeking asylum rather than submitting to UK authorities, namely well-grounded fears that he would be extradited to the US for prosecution for the act of publishing documents. Beyond that minor charge, British prosecutors could argue that Assange's evading of legal processes in the UK was so protracted, intentional, and malicious that it rose beyond mere failure to surrender to contempt of court. They seem to really like using that one now, which carries a prison term of up to 2 years. Just on those charges alone, then, Assange faces a high risk of detention for another year or even longer in a British prison. Currently, there's the only known criminal proceedings Assange faces, and in May 2017, Swedish prosecutors announced they were closing their investigation into the sexual assault allegations due to the futility of proceeding in the light of Assange's asylum and the time that has elapsed. The far more important question that will determine Assange's future is what the US government intends to do. The Barack Obama administration was eager to prosecute Assange and WikiLeaks for publishing hundreds of thousands of classified documents, but it ultimately concluded that there was no way to do so without either also prosecuting newspapers such as the New York Times and The Guardian, which published the same documents, or creating precedents that would enable criminal prosecution of media outlets in the future. Indeed, it is technically a crime under US law for anyone, including a media outlet, to publish certain types of classified information. Under US law, for instance, it was a felony for the Washington Post's David Ignatius to report on the contents of telephone calls intercepted by the National Security Agency between then National Security Advisor nominee Michael Flynn and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Even though such reporting was clearly in the public interest since it proved Flynn lied when he denied such contacts. The Washington Post and Ignatius, and not merely their sources, violated U.S. criminal law by revealing the contents of intercepted communications with a Russian official is made clear by the text of 18 Section 798 of the U.S. Code, which provides whoever knowingly and willfully communicates or otherwise makes available to any unauthorized person or publishes any classified information obtained by the process of communication intelligence from the communications of any foreign government shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both, emphasis added. But the U.S. Justice Department has never wanted to indict or prosecute anyone for the crime of publishing such material, contenting themselves instead to prosecuting the government sources who leak it. Their reluctance has been due to two reasons. First, media outlets would argue that any attempt to criminalize mere publication of classified or stolen documents is barred by the press freedom guarantee of the First Amendment, a proposition the Justice Department has never wanted to test. Second, no Justice Department has wanted, as part of its legacy, the creation of a precedent that allows the U.S. government to criminally prosecute journalists and media outlets for reporting classified documents. But the Trump administration has made clear they have no such concerns. Quite the contrary. Last April, Trump, then CIA Director Mike Pompeo, now as Secretary of State, delivered a deranged, rambling, highly threatening broadside against WikiLeaks. Without citing any evidence, Pompeo decreed that WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors like Russia, and thus declared, we have to recognize that we can no longer allow Assange and his colleagues the latitude to use free speech values against us. The longtime right-wing congressman, now one of Trump's most loyal and favorite cabinet officials, has also explicitly rejected any First Amendment concerns about prosecuting Assange, arguing that WikiLeaks pretended that America's First Amendment freedoms shield them from justice, but they may have believed that, but they are wrong. Pompeo then issued this bold threat. To give them the space to crush us with misappropriated secrets is a perversion of what our great Constitution stands for. It ends now. He's almost as bad as Brennan. Trump's attorney, Jeff Sessions, has similarly vowed not only to continue and expand the Obama Justice Department crackdown on sources, but also to consider the prosecution of media outlets that publish classified information. It would be incredibly shrewd for Sessions to lay down the foundation for doing so by prosecuting Assange first, safe in the knowledge that journalists themselves, consumed with hatred for Assange due to their personal reasons, professional jealousies, and anger over the role they believe he played in 2016 in helping Hillary Clinton lose, would unite behind the Trump Justice Department in support of its efforts to imprison Assange, not realizing that'll create precedent, obviously. During the Obama years, it was mainstream view among media outlets that prosecuting Assange would be a serious danger to press freedoms. Even the Washington Post editorial page, which vehemently condemned WikiLeaks, warned in 2010 that any such prosecution would criminalize the exchange of information and put at risk all media outlets. When Pompeo and Sessions last year issued their threats to prosecute Assange, former Justice Department spokesperson Matthew Miller insisted that no such prosecution could ever succeed. It is also hollow. DOJ knows it can't win a case against someone just for publishing secrets. For years, the Obama Justice Department searched for evidence that Assange actively assisted Chelsea Manning or other sources in hacking or stealing of documents in order to prosecute them for more than merely publishing documents, and found no such evidence. But even that theory, that a publisher of classified documents can be prosecuted for assisting a source, would be a severe threat to press freedom, since journalists frequently work in some form of collaboration with sources who remove or disclose classified information. And nobody has ever presented evidence that WikiLeaks conspired with or whoever hacked the DNC and John Podesta email inboxes to effectuate that hacking. But there seems little question, as Sessions surely knows, large numbers of U.S. journalists, along with many, perhaps most Democrats, would actually support the Trump Justice Department in prosecuting Assange for publishing documents. After all, the DNC sued WikiLeaks in April for publishing documents a serious, obvious threat to press freedom, and few objected. And it was Democratic senators such as Dianne Feinstein who during the Obama years were urging the prosecution of WikiLeaks, with support of numerous GOP senators. There is no doubt that after 2016, support among both journalists and Democrats for imprisoning Assange for publishing documents would be higher than ever. This goes on significantly longer, to be honest, and I'd recommend anybody go onto The Intercept just regularly to read what's going on there, because it's a very... it's a fairly clean source, to be honest. I know Glenn has his own biases, and he does make them fairly clear. But this one is quite just ridiculous. I mean, he knows what it would mean for him as well, because Edward Snowden, he broke that story, and he could be easily prosecuted under the same law for releasing information about the NSA. So, I mean, this is ridiculous, to be honest. I'm not surprised it's happened, but it is ridiculous that people would go so far as to try contempt of court to charge him with, because he's not a UK citizen. He should just effectively be, the only argument would be he should be deported. So I don't see why it would be something that UK law could apply to him when all he did was publish documents and evade a trumped-up charge.
And on that level, like, so there were some leaks for the French election a while back, and these leaks basically testified to a shit ton of corruption in those leaks, and they were pretty generally, like, slang termed the Macron leaks, and I helped seed those, and I also helped seed Vault 7, and
nice one.
And a precedent like this might mean that all of that sort of thing would be criminalized. You know, it would effectively be like, if you had the documents and you helped other people get the documents too, you could be prosecuted. And that's fucking like the worst precedent. But it would also mean that they could have a mass roundup of people involved in many things that the elites don't like. So, you know, maybe that's by design. Maybe they just want to clean up what they consider to be the trash.
Potentially, but to be quite frank, precedent is painful when you set it, especially if you don't set it well. And it will come back to haunt you very quickly, because the only way you can retain keeping the precedent like on one side only is to keep power.
Well,
once you do that to something like the First Amendment or something to speech, it doesn't take long for the backlash to begin when you enforce it, like they're doing over here.
Well,
I mean, you and I will agree. We see the backlash.
Yes.
And it's growing.
And on this particular level, there's an article that I'll include in the description as well, on antiwar.com, and it discusses in some detail. It's from Justin Raimondo over there. How Carter Page is in a similar situation to Julian Assange, and he insists that the deep state is after them both. And in this first 4 paragraphs, he writes, in an unprecedented move, the Justice Department has released the FISA application submitted by the FBI to spy on Carter Page, the rather hapless would-be advisor to the Trump campaign, who has been smeared as a Russian agent, but has not been charged after almost 2 years. We've never before even seen a FISA application in which law enforcement agents explain to a judge why it is necessary for them to conduct surveillance on an American citizen. And so this is a special treat. The document that came out of this unique Freedom of Information Act request shows that FBI had an ulterior motive in going after Page, and that they lied to the FISA court judge. In order to get the judge to agree to the surveillance, the FBI had to establish a fairly convincing probable cause. At minimum, agents had to identify multiple sources indicating that an act of espionage may have occurred or is about to occur imminently. The FISA application shows that the FBI had a single source, the unverified dossier compiled by former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, bought and paid for by the Clinton campaign to dig up dirt on Trump. The other ostensible sources were news articles by journalists whom Steele had leaked to. There was a clear intent to deceive the judge who read this application. This technique is a familiar one. Remember how the neocons used to quote each other as proof that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction? It's the old echo chamber trick, and every third-rate smear artist deploys it. The question arises, so is this how the FBI carries out its, quote, investigations into espionage? So... and the rest of the story is relatively interesting too, so I encourage people to read it.
I've got a similar one from the Federalist.
All right,
which it makes about 6 or 7. It makes 5 major points that really should be identified. Number 1, the dossier was the Steele dossier, that thing that basically said Trump paid bunch of prozzies to play water sports on the bed because Michelle Obama slept in it. That one was provided an essential part of the application for the FISA warrant. The dossier was not verified. That's point 2. Point 3, the application employed circular reasoning by using news articles which were sourced by Mr. Steele, the man who sourced the dossier. So it's single-sourced, like you said. Cites Steele's credibility despite overwhelming evidence to doubt it. Because he'd corroborated his reliable instance. They were unaware of any derogatory information about him. But there are a few problems with this. One is that the application itself admits Steele was working with subsources. We know he never visited Russia for his research, but he had other people gathering information from Russians, including Russian government officials. Since the information was provided by the second and third-hand sources, it is their reliability that the FBI should swear to, not Steele's. Just because he once had reliable information or had a source with reliable information doesn't mean that all or even most of the sources he compensated for information will be even remotely reliable. The other problem is, at some point in their process, the FBI realized their source was unreliable in multiple ways, yet they continued to swear to the court otherwise. Soon after the first application, the FBI had to terminate the relationship with Steele because he broke a promise not to share the information with the press. The application, this is I think number 4, made materially false claims. There was no citable veracity. One of the paragraphs regarding this is U.S. officials have since received intelligence reports that during the same 3-day trip, Page met with Igor Sechin, a longtime Putin associate and former Russian deputy prime minister, who is now the executive chairman of Rosneft, Russia's leading oil company, as well. A well-placed Western intelligence source tells Yahoo News. And guess who that source was? So, yeah, the Steele dossier has basically been pretty much totally discredited because the true funding of the dossier was oddly obscured as well. And we all know it was funded now by Fusion GPS, which was hired by the Democrats, and the DNC. So yeah. It's one of those things where anybody who believes anything based on this really ought to have an MRI, in my opinion, at this point, because I think they may be suffering from some sort of serious shock trauma here. Like, I don't know if it's possible to concuss somebody with a vote, but I'm really beginning to wonder if it does actually have that kind of power to cause like mental imbalances. It's the only explanation I've got now as to why so many people would believe Russia did it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the truth is that people have been polarized by partisan politics for, their entire lives. They've been told by friends and family that essentially the only way to be a good person is to be Republican or to be Democrat. And in this particular case, the Russia hysteria is born of people who would hate Trump anyway, even if Russia wasn't involved. So I mean, and I hate Trump. I recognize that, but fucking there's good reasons to hate him that aren't related to a scam about Russia. And even if it
Hmm.
was, it's not like the US doesn't meddle elsewhere. It's not like, countless foreign elections aren't damaged in their processes by like the average third world nation with a hacker farm. We went over a short bit ago the fact that like voting machines are rigged everywhere,
Mm.
and they have like remote access software that means the desktops are vulnerable to this bullshit. So
Yep.
I even if it's not Russia, there's hacking and meddling going on anyway. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
really interesting to watch the hysteria here.
I mean, let's not forget, there's been, I mean, I remember these rumors from decades ago that the dead voted in the South for the Democrats and that there were drug rings being run out of Alabama and Arkansas in particular under like the Clinton years. And a lot of those things have started resurfacing quite a lot lately, if I'm honest. The news reports from places like Free Thought Project and Gateway Pundit and Stillness in the Storm, all of these sorts of alternative news sites, some of them right wing, some of them just completely independent, some of them actually quite left wing. They're all coming out of the woodwork again. All the old skeletons. And it won't be long before one of them just falls on somebody's lap and they actually do something about it.
Yeah. Well, before we stop, because we're getting close to the time when we would have to. Let me
Sure.
bring something up that's a little bit less political and a little bit more possibly terrifying. This is from
Oh, goody.
This is from Activist Post, and it's China's serious and breaking vaccine scandal. Are your vaccines made in China? It's Catherine Frumpovich over there
Oh,
at
God.
Activist Post, and she writes, "Please consider this a public service announcement, if you will, because the mainstream lamestream media probably will not report on the growing Chinese vaccine scandal and huge protests against vaccines made and administered in China. However, as a personal caveat, I feel I must offer this. I'm leery about anything made in China, especially after doing the research for Chapter 13, The China Trade Debacle, Toxic and Made in China, for my 2009 book, Our Chemical Lives and the Hijacking of Our DNA, a probe into what's probably making us sick." She writes, as an illustration of that leeriness, just the other day, I purchased a food plastic wrap with the words no BPA or other toxins. However, when I got it home and read the fine print, I found made in China. Well, I returned it to the store for a refund, as the research indicates much of Chinese made consumables, whether non edibles like wallboard or food like farm raised fish and seafood, are contaminated with toxic chemicals, as I discuss at great length in Chapter 13 of the above book. However, the above being said explains why I feel I must warn about Chinese made vaccines. Here's something that ought to tweak your interests too. These are quotes. China's Food and Drug Administration announced it has ordered all production stopped at the vaccine maker and launched an investigation. Shangshen Biotechnology is China's second largest maker of the rabies vaccine and a subsidiary of a large publicly traded vaccine maker. The company said in a stock exchange filing Sunday that it had already halted production of another vaccine for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which regulators found last year to be substandard and which had also become the focus of public attention. This is from Yahoo News. Fucking
Fairly reliable, usually, except when it comes to the Steele dossier.
yeah, of course. The question all administering physicians, healthcare workers who administer vaccines, parents, and intended vaccines should be asking before submitting to receiving a diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine is, was the DTP vaccine made in China? And may I please see the vaccine package insert describing the vaccine? Chinese citizens have been protesting the above DTP vaccine, while Chinese health officials have been sanitizing the web of any information about the problems with Chinese vaccines. A Chinese newspaper, The People's Daily, said on Sunday that local regulators must, quote, rapidly take action, do a complete investigation, and announce authoritative information in a timely manner to pacify public anxiety. Chinese citizens have taken to protesting the vaccines on social media, WeChat, which readers can try to access here. Chinese parents are more than anxious about China's safety standards, especially since in 2008, some 300,000 children fell ill from drinking melamine-contaminated milk powder. 6 children died. What U.S. healthcare consumers and parents may not surmise is that many vaccines administered in the USA possibly could be made in China. Back in 2016, this was reported. U.S. and European vaccine makers such as Merck and Company, GlaxoSmithKline PLC, and Sanofi Pasteur SA maintain vaccine manufacturing operations in China. That this activity is on the rise and that Western vaccine makers are also establishing joint venture partnerships with Chinese vaccine companies. Furthermore, back in 2017, batches of DPT vaccine made by Zhangcheng were recalled. The current vaccine scandal is over rabies vaccines for humans. Even though the US CDC and others claim no Chinese-made vaccines are administered in the USA, if I were a person inclined to receive a vaccine, I'd still ask all that important questions. All important questions. Is it made in China? Because we have found in our research that you cannot trust the CDC and FDA when it comes to vaccines and the information both put out about vaccines as safe.
Accurate, especially if they are doing business with China, which I wouldn't doubt, because let's be frank, China is cheap. It is cheap to buy from China for a reason. And that reason is often found in the quality of the product. Now, some of them are good, some of them aren't. And it is up to the consumer when they deal with Chinese products to work out which ones are which. Can't just rely on it. So, and expect knockoffs. That's the problem, is there is not even a private regulatory force, and the government one is too lenient. Well, and if there was a privatory one, it would work, potentially, because they'd be paid to regulate.
And on that level, I mean, it's not just cheap because it's from China, it's also cheap because effectively you can ship over a shit ton of things at the same time. So if you're already getting like shirts, shoes, devices, whatever, you can also get like, you know, these vaccines. So shipping companies are more liable to reduce rates if you bundle a bunch of things that you're going to buy. That's how international trade works. So a country will export, but it'll export like a bunch of shit on the same ship, and the ship doesn't care what's in it. So the ship, like they'll give discounts essentially for people who are shipping from the same places to the same areas, and the logistics of it mean that essentially Chinese vaccines aren't really bought because they're considered to be safer. They're bought because they're definitely cheaper. So there's all that. I just thought that I'd scare the shit out of people about what they might have put in their veins this week. So
yeah, it's important to know you are what you eat and put in your body.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, you had one story from the Federalist I think we should get to, and then we should like spend maybe 2 minutes on that. We'll make our closing comments on that story, and then we'll wrap it up.
To be fair, mate, we did kind of cover it. So that was the one about Carter Page as well.
Well, right, yeah. So I guess then on that level, the only thing that we have left to say is monitor yourself, because like it's very clear that the feds want everybody afraid of their particular enemies. They're not very convincing when it comes to saying that they're, you know, concerned for your personal well-being. And, you know, we're talking about people that have very severe connections to people who would profit off of any of these things. So you want to talk like the Russiagate thing? You got the Clinton crime cartel, fucking making sure that everything seems like her opponent won for reasons that aren't. The entire system is rigged, and you've got the trumpets making it seem like this is the only scandal that's worth talking about. You're being divided. Just remember that today. I would say that would be my takeaway from the stories, because there's always going to be corruption and oppression that affects you on a very individual level, and you might end up like that boy being pinned under knee by the cops. You're not as strong as the system. You're not as strong as strong enough to fight the system on your own. And when people finally start to realize that a lot of this stuff starts in their brain, I think that'll change a lot.
Very true. A lot of from my point of view, it's, again, apart from the Greece thing, which is just, well, I'm actually maybe even that to some extent. This is a bit like what's in it for us is best. Because there was a group of people who set those fires. And potentially, let's assume that they got the information right. But somebody set them. And they were a group. And they thought that their well-being outstripped the well-being of everybody else, regardless of the cost. Right. Same thing's true about the state. It is a group. It will protect itself, just like any mafia, just like any religion, just like any group does. You cannot avoid that. And the only thing you can do is to stop thinking in groups and start thinking in terms of people. Stop treating people as just things. They're all independent. They're all individual, even when they don't think individually. And you've got to accept that because they all have different perceptions, they're going to do things for different reasons than you would. And you're going to have to get used to that, just as everybody else is. And once you do, you tend to find ways that actually work for you and everyone else you're dealing with.
Yep.
It's all about individualism.
And
if
I guess
you won't win.
And I guess I'll leave y'all with this. Another thing from the Free Thought Project. Tour de France halted as front-running riders hit in faces with police tear gas.
The
Tour de France was brought to a halt on Tuesday as police unleashed a fury of tear gas, and many of the front-running riders were hit. France, during the 16th stage of the Tour de France on Tuesday, severe fucking bullshit. Like I'm still, the caffeine is not quite kicked in. Several frontrunners in the race were hit with tear gas from police. Four-time champion Chris Froome was one of the cyclists in the lead who got a face full of the toxic chemicals. According to reports, the police were there responding to protesters. A handful of farmer protesters sat in the road to garner attention for their cause. Apparently, they're upset that the European Union has reduced their funding. A group of protesters, according to the French media, are from the local Ariège department. I'm pretty sure that's how that's pronounced, but took to the road Tuesday to get their voices heard. Their image will likely be marred now, however, as multiple cyclists from various countries were tear gassed as a result of their actions. Apparently, the officers ignored the direction and the strength of the wind, which resulted in clouds of the gas floating into the riders. Although the riders were accidentally hit with the gas, the images below showed that the protesters were indeed the targets of police. Basically,
I'd like to quickly know: were the protesters violent? Did they warrant needing tear gas?
They were throwing some hay bales like onto the
hay bales
surfaces.
Okay. So they throw some hay bales onto the surface. Was it when anybody was anywhere near the surface?
As far as I'm aware, no, but it might have been.
Okay. Let's work from an assumption of innocent until proven guilty, like we should, and say no. So at the moment, the police are basically charging a group sprayed the air with a gas, which then, because of the wind, which they should have known about, blows into the faces of one of their most iconic sporting events.
Yep.
And they're blaming the protesters for that.
They're blaming the protesters.
Okay.
So just remember, everywhere you go, the flat feet, the pigs, the fucking 5-0, whatever you call them in your local area, they're always the enemy. Always. Always the enemy. And if you don't think so, just watch these cops get away with it. Anyway, a bad morning to y'all, and I hope you have a bad morning and a bad day, and fuck the system, smash the state.
Bad morning to y'all.